Can Bryce Young and Dave Canales save the 2024 Carolina Panthers, or will they all doom you for fantasy this year? Let's talk about it.
Let's go.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dynasty After Dark. I'm your host, Calvin Timms, and today I'm going to be doing a fantasy breakdown of the Carolina Panthers for 2024. And apologize for being a little bit late here for the live broadcast. I am still trying to get my mic figured out. It's still kind of being a little funky, but I think I've got it fixed. But the problem is I have no playback sound in my ears, so it's completely mute in my ears, and I don't know how to fix that piece of it. But everything else aside, it's finally getting back. I think it sounds pretty good, so let me know in the comments down below if you can, if my mic does sound a little bit better. But that said, thank you guys for checking this video out. If you are a new time viewer, thanks for giving the channel a try. If you're one of our returning followers, we do appreciate you guys continue to come back and check out all of our videos. We've been really trying to pump out the content every summer for you guys, and we're not the biggest channel, but we do appreciate all the love that we do get from you guys out there. So thank you guys so much again, and I want to make sure that we give you the best content. We're going to be continuing with 3 a week here for the next couple weeks until my co-host Dale is having his baby, and then we'll figure it out from there, whether I'm flying solo or what it's going to be. But that said, I think it's going to be just the same. We're going to keep rolling with or without him, and obviously we'll be rooting for him with his little baby girl coming here soon. But that said, please go and follow Dale over on Twitter at Dynasty_Dale. You can find me over there at TDC_Calvin, or the podcast at FF After Dark. Obviously, you're listening to this on YouTube, or it's available on Spotify, Apple, Google, anywhere the podcasts are really found. So thank you guys for checking this out. Let's jump into the Carolina Panthers Dynasty breakdown. And obviously, we have to start at the top here with the head honcho, the quarterback, Bryce Young, and what to expect from the little man, Bryce Young. Obviously, the number one overall pick last year did not work out very well. Coming out of Alabama, everyone said that Bryce Young obviously didn't have all the physical tools that you need to be a superstar at the NFL level, but he does have all the intellectual tools that you'd want. He was one of the sharpest quarterbacks coming out in a long time. That was what was enough to push him to number one over guys like CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson and some of the other superstars in that class. And last year was not a great situation. Now, obviously, he went to Carolina Panthers, number one overall. They traded a fortune just to go and get him. Went from, I think, number 9 overall to number 1. They gave up DJ Moore, the number 9 pick, which was used for an offensive lineman. And I think a second round or a first rounder this year, it was just, the first rounder this year, that was also the number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams. So very expensive trade to go and get Bryce Young. Left them with no weapons whatsoever. They took Jonathan Mingo in the second round, but Jonathan Mingo, at the time, they had just Adam Thielen and not much else. They had Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard at the running back, a very, very poor offensive line. And I do believe that they've tried to address a lot of that this offseason. They've spent a lot on retooling the weapons, a lot of high picks. They went and got Xavier Legette. They traded for Deontay Johnson. They brought in Jonathan Brooks. Still have Chuba Hubbard. They even drafted a new tight end, Jatavian Sanders, who in the pre-draft process was one of our favorite as the podcast. So lots of weapons for Bryce Young. They bring in Dave Canales to be their new head coach, who we've talked about Dave Canales quite a bit on this podcast, but he was in Seattle just a couple years ago, and he saved Geno Smith. That was when Geno was looking really, really good. Last year goes to Tampa Bay as the OC there. Kind of saves Baker Mayfield. Baker's looking very good again last year. Now he comes to Carolina. Can he do it a third time, or is the third time the charm, where it's going to finally hit midnight for Dave Canales and he's not going to be able to save Bryce Young? Personally, I actually do like everything that they've done. You look at last year, Bryce Young was sacked 62 times for 477 yards lost. It was just very, very bad. He only had 315 completions for 2,800 yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Obviously, the new weapons are going to help that. He surprisingly had 39 carries for 250 yards on the ground, but I think that Dave Canales is going to bring a new level to this offense, and that's where I'm very interested in Bryce Young. Now, in one quarterback systems, I'm not that interested in Bryce Young. I don't ever see him, and this is what I kind of talked about last year at the same time, why I was perceived as a hater on Bryce Young, but he just doesn't have the physical tools. And for you to be an outlier mentally, you have to be thrown for 5,000 yards. And I just don't really see that ever from Bryce Young, or 4,000 yards and 45 touchdowns. And it's just, I don't see that ever in his range of outcomes. I think he's kind of limited to maybe 4,000 yards passing, but probably closer to 25 to 30 touchdowns each year. He'll probably be pretty safe with the interceptions, keep that around like 8 to 10, somewhere in that range. So he's always going to be a lower tier Derek Carr, in my opinion. And Derek Carr has finished his career in that low end quarterback 1 to mid quarterback 2 range his entire career. I could see that very same thing from Bryce Young if he can get it together this season. Maybe he's got kind of a ceiling of 15 to 20, and that's where he's going to live for the next couple of years. That's not necessarily that bad. And when you see his current value, he's rated as the 112 to 201 pick wise. He's going behind guys like J.J. McCarthy, Drake May, even behind Deshaun Watson, right ahead of Will Levis and Kirk Cousins. I think that I'm kind of getting a little bit more interested in Bryce Young at that price. He's rated as the quarterback number 20 overall. And again, I think that if you can develop him, and I do believe in Dave Canales. I think he's a really, really good head coach, and he's a really good offensive mind for this system. All the weapons that they've brought in, they've retooled this offensive line. They've really tried to fix a lot of the holes there. If you can fix Bryce Young, I am interested at low quarterback 2 pricing. Now, when you take into account the fact that he also finished as the quarterback number 23 last year, in a very bad year, very, very poor, not much to go well last year, but the rushing yardage really kind of saved him a little bit and raised that floor for him. When you have 255 rushing yards, that really helps from a fantasy perspective when you're not throwing for many touchdowns, you're not really throwing for that many yards. Now, you couple that with, I do believe that they're going to try and use him on some of those scramble runs. You just look at Baker Mayfield from last year, and I'm pulling him up really quickly here on Sleeper, but Baker Mayfield last year had 62 designed rushing attempts for 163 yards. So you get the same 200-ish rushing yards from Bryce Young this year. You really up his passing yardage, which is kind of his profile. That's his calling card, is what he's able to do mentally and dice defenses up, with some of the underneath stuff and just his decision making. All of a sudden, Bryce Young feels like his floor is 23. And I think for fantasy football, that can be very valuable, albeit very overlooked. So, at the current price of Bryce Young, I do think that I'd be a little bit more interested. And I think that that's going to kind of ripple and carry through to a lot of the other players here on this offense. So just wanted to start with Bryce Young. Let's go over to the running backs here. We're going to talk about these guys, and then we'll get into the pass catchers for Bryce Young and why I think they're all being undervalued. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you probably know most of my thoughts on most of these players because I've not been shy about them. I've kind of talked about them, done some more individual videos for some of the receivers or, this running back here. But I do believe that Jonathan Brooks is being overdrafted and overrated. He's kind of fallen the last couple of weeks a little bit to the running back number 14. for me, the hardest thing with Jonathan Brooks, when you look at his current value, he was a second-round pick, first running back taken in the mid-second. I think they traded up, if I remember correctly, but the fact that people are completely ignoring the fact that he tore his ACL just last year, very late in the season. I think it was around December-ish timeline, if I remember correctly, and I don't have the injury history pulled up in front of me, but he tore his ACL just last year at a very late time, and people are acting like he's going to be ready. News reports came out over the weekend that Dave Canales doesn't even think he'll be ready for the first month of the season. This training camp is very important for young players. When you miss the entire rookie training camp, it does set you back a little bit from a fantasy production standpoint, right? Where I don't see him ever living up to the value that has been placed on him right now, and the lofty number one in this class. He's basically a top 12 dynasty running back already without ever having played a snap. People are overestimating his stats from college at Texas. They were okay, but they weren't amazing. And people kind of fell in love with the tape there in Texas. But, again, I don't want to come across as a hater on Jonathan Brooks. I like the talent, but I do think we need to be a little bit more realistic with how we value him. And top 12 is just it's a very tough pill to swallow for me personally, where there's other guys going behind him that I think are a little bit more interesting long term. Obviously he's well ahead of Trey Benson, who's the running back 17. 5 slots doesn't sound like a lot, but the trade value in those 5 slots is quite big. And when they should be talked about as the number 1 and number 2, you can coin flip which one you want to go first. It is a little bit crazy to me on that aspect. Trey Benson is not coming off an ACL tear, whereas Jonathan Brooks is. Trey Benson was an athletic freak at the combine, and we have no idea what Jonathan Brooks can do. Obviously, I think he'd be pretty good there on the combine, but I just think that we're crowning Jonathan Brooks a little bit prematurely, and you kind of see this every year with some of these young guys. Just because he's a young running back doesn't mean he should be top 12. I'm not even making the argument that Trey Benson should be higher. I'm just saying that Jonathan Brooks is probably too high at this point. And then when you couple that with the fact that next year in 2025, the running back class is going to be very, very good. There's probably 4 running backs I'd take over Jonathan Brooks right now in next year's class. It's that good. I think that it's going to be a little bit of a short-sighted adventure here where we're overvaluing Jonathan Brooks for 2024. He's going to start slow because of missing training camp, coming off the injury. It takes a year to come back from the ACL as it is. Maybe around the playoffs, he can start really starting to show what his capabilities are, but it's just asking a lot from a young player, and then I don't think he's necessarily going to hold that value next year because of the incoming draft class. So that's my only take on Jonathan Brooks. Again, I don't want to come across as a hater. I do like him. You can make the argument to me to take him over Trey Benson. I actually did in a league, so it's not like I'm completely out on him at value in the late first round of your rookie drafts. But I just think that we're overlooking some of the things on him that we're holding Trey Benson accountable for. So just my thoughts on Jonathan Brooks. I do think that he will be good in this offense, but I do think he has a little bit of a limited ceiling long term. Now, his running back mate in this backfield is going to be Chuba Hubbard. And Chuba Hubbard is interesting for fantasy football because you look at what he was able to do last year, and I think that he is being very underrated. Finished as the running back number 27 last year, really started non-existent, for the first month and a half, the first 6 weeks until their bye. He had 2 games in the double digits, and one was because of a touchdown. Both of them would have been 10 points otherwise. So not a ton of production in that regard. But after the bye, they really started getting him involved on the ground, and he routinely carried the ball for 15, 16, 20, 23, 25, 22, 16, 23. They were giving it to him all over the place because he was popping off runs. He became extremely explosive in the back half. So, if you kind of take out those first couple of games and what he was able to do in those, in the back half, he was much, much better. And he also contributed from a receiver standpoint as well. 39 catches for 233 yards. Nothing amazing, but when you take into account the fact that Jonathan Brooks is probably starting the season injured, not playing for the first month, Chuba Hubbard is undrafted in some leagues, and he's going as the running back 49, overall 220. So it depends on how many you have, especially in redraft. He's a name to really be watching out for, but 220 overall, depends on how many rounds you have, but I mean, man, it's just so cheap in my mind for Chuba Hubbard. And I think that it's something worth looking at that, 49 overall for the running back. And I think that he has a potential to be a top 24 running back to start the season. And even after Jonathan Brooks comes back, I think that you can definitely have some production from him. At the lofty cost of a late third round pick, I mean, are we really losing anything for that potential production? Now, you might be saying, well, I'd never trust him to start him, but man, for me, it's hard to turn down potential production with a good pass catching back who can contribute from the ground game, can contribute from the air, and also has a rebuilt offensive line in front of him. So, and a head coach that loves to run the ball. So, to me, it seems like a little bit of an overlook on a lot of people's parts, but I'm not here to completely judge on Chuba Hubbard here. So I think that there's a little bit of sneaky value with Chuba Hubbard for 2024. He will be a free agent after this year, and he's 25 years old, but I could see them bringing him back for maybe a 3-year, $6 million contract or something like that. Very cheap, but serviceable deal for him to be the backup handcuff to Jonathan Brooks. So there might be some long-term potential there with him as well. Now, talking about long-term potential, we're going to talk about Adam Thielen, the pass catcher for the Carolina Panthers here, as the first guy we're going to talk about. Adam Thielen last year, people are going to talk about how he's going to be able to reproduce that at the ripe age of 34 years old. I don't believe that what Adam Thielen did last year was sustainable. He comes off of having Frank Reich, who loves to hyper-target at least one guy in the receiving core. It kind of fell apart for Frank Reich last year, gets fired. They shake things up, and Adam Thielen was not really the same after that. He had some spurts of games here and there where he would pop off, but you look at the first month, right? 3 points in the first week, but then 20, 32, 15, 28, 29, 15, and then I think right around here is when Frank Reich got fired. Not 8 points, 10, 15, 1, 5, 12, 8, 15. So it just fell off a cliff in terms of production. Now, was that because the offense, or was that because Thielen got hurt? What was it because, they changed the way that this offense was running and was schemed? I'm not too sure. So just something to look at with Adam Thielen is I don't like it long term, personally. I don't think that he's going to be the number one in this offense. He's going to be a part-time player. He's about 30. He'll be 34 here in just a couple of days. So, 34-year-old receiver, I'm kind of out personally. He's worth nothing, but people are going to point to what he did last year with a completely different coaching staff and everything and say, well, look what he did there. And, I don't think, he's the same value as Jonathan Mingo, his teammate, and I'd probably take a stab at Jonathan Mingo over someone like an Adam Thielen at this point in time. Now, everyone knows my feelings on Deontay Johnson. Completely undervalued. You've seen all the hype camp hype. Man, it's late. I'm tired. The camp hype on Deontay Johnson and Bryce Young and their connection. And I do believe that Deontay is going to be the number one for this team, and he's going to be a superstar for fantasy football. He's going as the wide receiver number 45, 125 overall, and we're acting like he completely fell off a cliff because he got traded away from Pittsburgh. He was doing fine in Pittsburgh with no quarterback. Why do we think that in this offense he's going to be completely worthless? So I don't get it. Even if you go back to 2022, his last full season that he played, 147 targets that year from Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett for 86 catches. You give him 147 decent targets and he's going to blow that 86 catches out of the water. So a lot of potential for Diontae Johnson, being slept on, mid-second round pick right now, and I think you can get so much production. He's only 28 years old. He just turned 28. The way that these guys are taking care of themselves, a lot of them play until their early 30s anyway. So you could have 3 years of decent Diontae Johnson, decent to really good Diontae Johnson. And if you want to hear my thoughts a little bit more on Diontae Johnson, go look at my breakdown on the channel for just Diontae. I get in depth on him, on my full expectations for this year. But basically, summary, long story short, too long, didn't watch. I think that he has top 12 potential, fringe top 12. I don't think he has top 5, top 10, but like maybe top 12, right in that range, where he's a fringe wide receiver 1. And he's going as the wide receiver 45 overall. So what are we doing? I think that there's just some amazing value for Diontae Johnson in 2024. Now, his other teammate, just freshly drafted, Xavier Legette, he's a little bit more interesting. He's the same value. They're back-to-back in terms of current rating, how people are drafting these two guys, and he's the wide receiver number 44. I'm not the biggest fan of Xavier Legette. I think that when you have a 4-year player and in the 5th year is when he breaks out, I'm kind of out personally. He's a really fun guy to root for. Very Louisiana accent, very, very thick. Fun guy to listen to his interviews, but I mean, he's going to play a specific role for this team. He's a very large human being. You look at his measurables, he's 6'3", 227 pounds. He's a big boy. He's not the most agile, in my opinion. He's very fast. Straight line speed is A+, but he's not really he's kind of a DK Metcalf type, right? Where once he gets going, it's hard to stop him, but you switch directions and it's not the bell of the ball essentially for the wide receivers. So I don't see it personally. I like the addition, but I don't see it working out from a fantasy production standpoint. I just think that there's other guys you're going to want. Diontae is going to be the one you want to go to because of his underneath ability with Bryce Young. Obviously Bryce Young is a little bit smaller, so you want to get the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. So I think Diontae is the one you want. Xavier Legette will be nice, and maybe in a best ball league, Legette is someone you would want to go and target. But yeah, I think that it's going to be very, very boom or bust for Xavier Legette, and I'm not completely thrilled. Now, the last guy I did want to talk about was Jonathan Mingo. Mingo is someone that is interesting. I could see him playing on the outside with Diontae Johnson going a little bit more to the slot. It's hard to tell how they're going to use them. They might be interchangeable. Xavier Legette is going to be outside only, but Mingo is interesting. You go back a year ago, he was a very late riser in terms of his draft stock. People were talking about him as a fringe wide receiver, like first round wide receiver, and ultimately goes high second. A lot of people didn't know who he was, but he was very interesting coming out of Ole Miss. 6'2", 220, obviously another big body guy to pair with Bryce Young, and he looked lost last year. He looked very, very bad. Reports have been much better out of training camp this year. They're saying that he looks like a completely different player, which is good because the player he looked like last year was not very good. So if you can completely change how you're looking, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And they say he's been looking pretty good. So he's worth a flyer, I think, at his current value. Again, he's being valued as a 4th-round pick. That's essentially free, especially in rookie drafts if you haven't done them yet. If you're a late round or late in the year rookie team, like league like ours is, my home league, we do it very late. It's essentially free to go and get Jonathan Mingo, and it could pay off immensely if he ends up being the number 2 option for this team. So just something to look at there. And that's pretty much it. I'm not very interested in Jatavian Sanders. I think there's some long-term potential, but you're probably 2-3 years away from ever really caring about that. So yeah, I don't really like him at tight end number 22. So there's really not much else. It takes these rookies a couple years anyway to establish themselves. And I don't think they're really going to lean on the tight end position for Bryce Young, especially this year. So by the time he's fantasy relevant, things will be completely different. They might have a completely different receiving core by then. So, yeah, I think this offense is going to be a little bit underrated for 2024, but there's definitely some sneaky gems. And if you're in a redraft, you get your redrafts coming up. I think Deontay Johnson is one of my favorite redraft targets I think he's like an 8th-round pick right now. Give or take, he's going 125 overall, which on Sleeper that would be in a 12 team, that'd be a 10th round pick. But I've seen him going a lot earlier in terms of actually draft boards with mock drafts and everything like that. So that might be a little bit deceiving, but 8th round pick on Deontay Johnson, top 12 potential. I mean, count me in, man. I do like that quite a bit for a free target there. So that is the Carolina Panthers in a nutshell. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Who am I too starry-eyed, or tell me why I'm stupid for not loving Jonathan Brooks at his current pricing. But either way, it's all in love, and thank you guys again for checking this out. I'm hoping to have the mic fixed eventually, but again, let me know in the comments if it sounds like crap. But I'm trying to get it fixed for you guys, so just keep, help me out here. Give me some comments and some feedback. But yeah, we'll get it fixed eventually. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining us here tonight. And until next time, have a good night.
And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?